Welcome everybody to our latest Zoom. I'm joined this morning by Mark Bird, Managing Director at the Greyhound Board of Great Britain. Good morning, Mark. Lovely to see you. You doing
Lloyd.
well?
Yeah, no, all good. Good week. So it doesn't always happen like that, but so far so good.
Excellent. Uh, Clearly, one important place to start with the injury and retirement data figures that came out earlier in the week. Would it be fair to say some very good news on most of the field and some room for improvement on others?
Yeah, that'd be a fair assessment. I think this is the third year, first of all, that we've published these figures. We started back in 2018, and just to remind everybody, the reason we're doing that is because the EFRA committee, part of the government, wanted us to start doing that, and that's kind of in line with what horse racing do. Although we go to a much more detailed basis in terms of what we're presenting. So, but as you said, yeah, there's some excellent news in there. But there will always be room for improvement. That's anything to do with stats. We'll always measure in there that we can do better. We'll try to do over the next few years as well.
Yeah, breaking it down then. Obviously, the bond scheme has been well. It's been a fantastic success already, and should continue to grow. 95% of dogs now rehomed. You think we can squeeze that up a little bit higher?
Well, it's funny. I watched your Zoom call you did with Peter Harnden yesterday, and if I'm absolutely honest with you, last year we thought we could probably squeeze a bit more on the 90% that we had then, knowing that the GRS was coming in, as you said, and again with the GRS, already 2,000 dogs that have gone out the sport with a bond attached. Now in the region of 6,000 or 7,000 dogs that are in the system that are racing that already have the bond. So it's easily over a third of those dogs. In a matter of 2 years, it should be all the dogs that are in racing will have that bond attached. So you kind of think that perhaps we could get a little bit more, but let's be frank, 95% is a fantastic amount of dogs that are in the sport, and we will always try to get more out of that. But you're never going to get to 100%. We all know that. But again, if you correlate that with other areas in sport and things, I think it's a stunning result, and it's testament to everybody who's involved in sport that we've got it to 95%, let alone squeezing it anymore.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, certainly when, as we would all speak to people who aren't involved in the industry, and you say, well, as I previously was saying, it's 88% or whatever, and they're astonished because I think generally that the public assumes it's probably about 10% that get rehomed, and great work there. Good news again on the injuries, certainly the non-fatal injuries. I guess where it starts to, the area that is still going to cause some discomfort is the fatalities.
Well, we set ourselves ambitious targets. It wasn't anybody else setting those targets other than the GBGB, and it wasn't government, it wasn't the animal welfare charities. We set those targets, and along with the economic euthanasias, where we said, look, we want to get that down by at least 50% over the next 3 years, and that started in 2019. So this is the third year. So by the end of 2021, we'll be reporting back on as we have done this week. So you're absolutely right. The track fatalities have only gone down from 7 from where they were last year. And already I've seen an article that may or may not be published by The Guardian, which is heavily lent on by the League Against Cruel Sports, which are actually highlighting that number. But that's the whole point of data. Data actually leads us to where we should be actually focusing more and more detail. So again, and I am going to mention it, the economic euthanasias and the unsuitable for homing, which only a couple of years ago we were almost hovering around about the 200 number. They're down to, I think it's 24 and 23 respectively this year. That's, again, fantastic news for people in the sport. And again, you've got to look at the people who are looking in on us as well, and most notably government. And you've probably seen the lines from Lord Goldsmith in terms of what we're doing. But to return to your actual question about the 200, yes, that's what we need to do moving forward now. And certainly with the budget that we've got, we're already looking at the injury recovery scheme and how we can actually incentivise owners to use that scheme, which they already are, in terms of the more serious injuries. So things like complex hock injuries, things like long bone injuries. These, I mean, the top at the moment on the injury recovery scheme is £400, as I'm sure you know, and that's on the basis that the owners have to pay out 800. Well, a long bone injury, as many of your listeners will know, can cost anything £2,500 to £3,000 even. So what is it that we can do to try and support those owners by increasing the cap from 400 to even say £1,000, that would be something that could help and assist owners in terms of treating them. And it may mean that there are, we can start to squeeze that number as well. Will we get it down to the 50%? Because we're only running about 18% at the moment. We could. We absolutely could. I'm never going to say we can't. But if we don't, then we'll continue that into next year. And that's what people forget. Just because we've got a set of performance figures, if you want to call them that, for a 3-year period, that doesn't mean to say that we just sit there with our arms folded at the end of it. We set ourselves new targets, because again, it will always be about not being complacent and trying to drive those numbers down.
Yeah, I mean, you made a point there about the Guardian. I think when we were originally, the board agreed with government, or was told by government, you need to produce figures, albeit we set our own, the industry set its own goals and set its own ambitions. While there's the negative, which we tend to concentrate on, which is, we're showing our figures out. It's there for us to be pulled apart. I guess the positive is that at least these figures are now being acknowledged as being legitimate. And as they get better, because for so many years as an industry, I can remember Eric Crosby talking about 10,000 greyhounds a year are put to sleep. And I thought, we don't even barely get 10,000 into the industry. It's even less now.
Well, I mean, again, we can all recall the banners where thousands of dogs disappear each year. You don't see that anymore. I mean, okay, it's a different rhetoric, it's a different banner, but the reality is we are dealing with facts. And going back to that Guardian article, the League Against Cruel Sport are intimating that these numbers aren't accurate. You said yourself, we have them all independently audited in terms of our right. That includes the auditors going to, in normal circumstances, they would go to the track, they'd check what's in the vet's book, they'd then correlate that with the injury database to actually verify that what we're doing is correct. And you're absolutely right. This is about facts. This isn't about fiction or embellishment. If there were things that we weren't doing or we'd taken our eye off, you would expect to see some of these figures. We haven't. And one of the questions I addressed to the All-Party Parliamentary Group last night was the fact that you've got to remember in 2020, we had 3 months of no racing. And my concern, and I think a lot of people in the sport, was when we did come back racing, and let's remember, we came back first. We were last finishing, we came back first. But when we did come back, we were going to see a spate of injuries then, because we weren't absolutely sure that trainers would have been, still giving the attention to their dogs as they would do under normal. Let's face it, a lot of those were under pressure and being locked down as well. We've got quite a few of our training population are elderly, and we really did fret about that. But you know what? This is another positive story, because when those dogs did come back and they trialled in May, if you can recall, for the 18th of May, and they ran on the 1st of June, there wasn't that spate of injuries. So again, the salient lesson on there is that all of the trainers that were out there with their dogs were still caring for them, were still training them and getting them ready for when they come back to racing. And again, I think that's a huge compliment to the sport and to those involved in it.
Yeah, we could have here been trying to justify that blip, couldn't we? It's up a little bit this year because obviously of the layoff and dogs came back and got in.
We kind of have been doing that, especially with animal welfare charities. And again, it was brought up on the All-Party Parliamentary Group last night that there were in the region of about 90,000 fewer runs last year. But that's why we don't just publish numbers, we publish percentages as well.
Yes.
So you can actually drill into that to say, well, yeah, but pro rata, it's going to be better or it's going to be worse. And again, with injuries, it was only slightly up on where it was from 2019. So I think people need to be cognizant of that and need to be proud of it, because as a sport, not only have we endured over the toughest year that anyone can recall in living memory, but we're still here and we're still racing. Yes, there was some collateral damage in terms of 3 tracks going to the wall. Yes, I mean, you only got to look in the last couple of weeks as you've had on here. Here we are looking at 2 more tracks opening up. That's fantastic, and people really need to be aware of that and relish it.
Definitely so. One more sort of question on similar topic. If the board was to have access to greater funding, let's say you had your 1% return from the bookmakers. You've already identified the fact that there would be more money going into the serious injuries to prevent owners from saying, "I'm sorry, I can't afford £5,000 for this problem.
Yeah.
Would there be any other areas that you would be spending that money if it became available?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned 1% there, and that's, you know, just because we've been through COVID and just because we've come out the other side doesn't mean to say that again in terms of the funding for the sport that we have on our hands. You know, we've had, even as recently as 3 weeks ago, had conversations with the Betting and Gaming Council about trying to get their members to move that position 0.1%. It's enough money for us to make a significant difference. I don't think it's a huge amount of money for them. And we will continue those conversations, which have been largely positive. What that money actually then gives us an ability to do is not only just deal with the year ahead, it just allows us to deal with the next 5 years, to start planning for just everything that we've always said to the board is what we want to do. Because otherwise, it can't be sustainable if you're wondering what's going to happen with the bookmakers in terms of either withdrawing their levy or whether or not they're actually just turn around and say, well, no, we want to continue paying at 0.6%. So what we've had to do and what we are doing is, and again, the update on the ground commitment is a good piece of evidence of that, is show people how we'll be spending that money. And yes, you're right, we'll increase the injury recovery scheme, but there are other things that we could be doing as well. You know, the Greyhound retirement scheme, the GBGB puts in £100, and depending on whether it's a British bred dog or not, the owner puts in 100 or 200. In some cases, £400 will cover the cost of keeping that dog, but not in all cases, especially if the dog needs dental work or needs to be spay or neutered. So, you know, it may well get to a point where the GBGB can put twice that amount of money in. You know, we do want to try and incentivize things like breeding. There are 101 things that we could be doing with additional money, and that's what we're trying to indicate. And I think that day will eventually come.
Yeah, I mean, I had to think about it and thought, you know, if I was in your position, what would I be considering? I mean, for a start, we have those dogs unsuitable for homing. You could keep them in kennels. I mean, there's only 24 or so, but I just think it sends a message out to say we'll pay trainers to keep these dogs for the rest of their days. We understand that, you know, when we refer to unsuitable for homing, we're concerned really for the general public or their pets as much as anything else. When a trainer says, I wouldn't really trust him, it's because he doesn't think he can be detrained.
I remember it's a good couple of years ago now, if not longer, I went to Nora Callison's. She's got a little side wing of that sanctuary, which dogs which, you know, she or people who look after the dogs have seen them as unsuitable for homing. But it doesn't mean to say that those dogs don't have a great life. They're still in kennels, but they're in sumptuous conditions in terms of where they are. And for me, you know, there was a dog the other day that was a very bad injury, and everyone that was there, I think including the owner, but certainly the trainer, was saying this is a bad-natured dog. Now, a few years ago, that dog would have been put to sleep, and there'll probably be some people out there even now saying that would have been the right thing to do. I'm not going to argue against that, but what I am going to say, the dog was treated. When it came to, surprise, it was still a nasty dog. But that dog will have a life now. Whatever that life looks like, it's not going to be put to sleep necessarily, because it doesn't have to be. And that's the sort of thing. I mean, the League Against Cruel Sports again, the one thing they've said on their press release is one dog dying is one dog too many. Now, we're never going to get away from that, because there'll always be, sadly, an attrition around dog racing. We have to do the very level best that we can for our dogs, because otherwise we may as well just pack up and go home now.
Yeah. The other point I was thinking in terms of where the money would be spent, certainly education, certainly in terms of having more people like these physios who do a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, we only have a handful of them. And if the industry could afford to pay some more salaries for people to go and check dogs and help the trainers out, that again would surely reduce the amount of injuries and, of course, the amount of retirements as well.
That is in no way a bad shout, Floyd, in terms of, you know, what other things we could be doing. And, you know, we're already looking at having a full-time veterinary director on board. I think that's the right thing to do in terms of expertise, but also in terms of how we can progress things. And you're absolutely right, you know, in terms of behaviourists, these people do exist for a reason. And maybe even if we're not employing someone, then maybe we should look to them to give us more advice. And going back to your muscle men and the niggles and all the rest of it, yeah, absolutely. Most trainers will rely on someone like that to go around and assist. But that's on the basis they can afford to do it. So if we can take that away from them, then that's one less problem they've got to face.
Well, no trainer is ever going to say, "Oh, I don't want that person to check my dogs over." Quite the opposite. I mean, I think it's very significant how, I've made reference to it before, but when there are dogs in Category One finals, the time and resources is found to get those dogs checked over, and frequently there are bits and pieces found. Nothing, not major stuff. I mean, but I think the vets will all concede that they can have little pulls and little bits of massage is required. But the average graded dog doesn't get that. And if it's not detected, which a lot of these, because by their very nature, are very minor niggles, but if they're not detected, then they do escalate and that they do become more serious.
Well, again, listen to what you put out yesterday with Peter Harnden. There was this conversation, I can't remember if it was you or Peter or both, but there is this issue around things like stretch factors and the fact that an attending vet at the track isn't going to necessarily pick up on the trot up or trot away that dog is carrying an underlying issue. The trainer themselves may not know, but the point is that will manifest itself in the race that dog then undergoes. It's likely to. That's where the dog is stretched in terms of its running ability. So we've done work with a professor to look at predictive modelling around certain dogs, and that paper, which was reported on earlier this year, is good. But it requires an awful lot more work. It requires things like investment to have someone like an analyst looking at things as well. And of course, there's been work done at certain tracks, most recently at Nottingham, with regards to infrared cameras on dogs to see if they can pick up any underlying issues. There's loads of things. I was even talking to our track subcommittee yesterday, and we've got a meeting with them on Monday, talking about if we had the availability of money. Now, you will know this better than I do, Floyd. Back in the day, there were alternative running services that were being looked at. Never really took any traction. But again, why wouldn't we want to look at the availability of an alternative running surface in the years to come? And I'm talking perhaps in the next 10 years. But you need significant amounts of investment to do that. A lot of our quarries, where we get the sand supply for the tracks, are literally drying up. So, this isn't a question of saying with an extra £4 million, for example, we can do X, Y, and Z. A lot of it will be investment over the next 5 to 10 years, so that we've still got a sustainable sport at the end of it.
Yes, very, very much so. Very much so. I mean, certainly some of this research has been done. I mean, there were efforts made on alternative services, and they didn't work out. I must briefly tell you, when Gordon Bissett retired, he did confess, amongst the many exceptional things he did for track surfaces, there was an almighty cock-up, and it related to alternate surfaces, and he was telling me he got some alginate that was originally from ladies' sanitary wear, and it was supposed to keep the retain the moisture to keep the track safe. And he said the first time they tried it on, nobody could stand up when they walked on the track, so it was swiftly dismissed.
But my point is, we cannot afford to stand still. We need to be looking in areas of research, design. Yeah. We need to make sure that we are still a sport that is fit for purpose in 5 or 10 years' time, because just because we have animal welfare charities supporting us and we strongly have government supporting us, that doesn't mean to say that next year things could change the year after that. So we've always got to try and be on the front foot with a lot of this. And sadly, that involves normally quite large sums of money. But if we get that, we're already showing that the money that we're given from the fund, which obviously derives from bookmakers, still 75% of that is going on track safety, on welfare, and making sure that the integrity of the sport is as well. So it's there for people to see in terms of the accounts and everything else. But with a substantial increase, I think that literally we can do so many more better things to ensure that the dogs are looked after and the sport has a future.